This isn't gonna work well.
It's fun.
In our previous video, we mocked up the town of Switch Junction and realigned the tracks for better operations. In this video, we're gonna take it from that to this scenic, landscaped scene that's ready for detailing and lighting, all of it using regular guy techniques.
Let's go.
Hey rail fans, welcome to It's My Railroad. We have got a lot of work to do today to get this scene from just track on bench work to this beautifully landscaped, somewhat detailed community that I'm totally stoked about. Every time I come out in the hobby room, I look at this scene and I go, well, that looks good, baby. Anyway, it's my railroad and that's what I think. To get us there, I'm gonna use a whole lot of regular guy techniques, but I'm not gonna take a deep dive into all those techniques. The video will be far too long. So my commitment to you is, if something I did you wanna see more of and maybe a closer look at, a deep dive, just leave a comment down here. The first 50 or so comments I'll take a look at, see what you guys are looking to see more. I've got plenty of model railroad to build, so I've got plenty more occasions to do that. But that'll be in the future, that'll be in the comments. Let's get started on this. First thing I wanted to do is I wanted to lower the grade of the track to get it down closer to ground level. Well, the problem is track's already laid. So how do you do that? Well, taking a page out of the not rocket science playbook, I took a piece of paper and laid it down in an area where I wanted to lower the grade of the tracks. And then I just used my fingernails and sort of made a tracing along the edge of the cork roadbed. That gives me the basic shape that I need. After I'd done that, I just cut it out with a pair of scissors. And then laid it down on a piece of cardboard and traced it out. Now the cardboard I'm using is thinner than cork roadbed. I could have used cork roadbed up in here to do the same thing. I've seen other people do that, but I didn't want to go quite that low or that high with it. So I wanted something a little thinner, that's maybe 6 scale inches. And this cardboard, if you look at it with the cork roadbed, it seems to fulfill that purpose. Then I just cut it out with a pair of scissors. And then I just went through and repeated that whole process for the entire scene where we're gonna lower the grade of the track. Then I did go through and put another layer on top of that layer where I've got my asphalt, so it sticks up a little bit above the dirt. Anyway, to secure all this in place, I used Gorilla Construction adhesive. As you guys know, I use Gorilla Construction adhesive to glue down my cork roadbed, to glue down my track. It's good stuff, I've got plenty of it. And just spread it out and press the piece in place, hold it for just a second or two, and then it sticks. It don't go nowhere. Now I'm spreading that construction adhesive out uniformly for the entire piece. This is because in the next step, we're gonna put drywall mud or joint compound on top of that cardboard to actually make the surface. The thing is, it's got moisture in it and cardboard warps. So if you don't stick it down real good, you're gonna end up with this going on top of your railroad. Another thing I love about the construction adhesive is areas where the styrofoam subbase I have on there have sort of been pulled up because I've pulled up track and stuff. It fills that right in. It does the same thing when you're using cork roadbed. It'll sort of fill in the gap and sort of put a bridge over it. It works out really well. Well, so there you go. I got all the cardboard glued down and ready to install the drywall mud on top. Now I've got a big box of drywall mud I got from a job site. And it's pretty simple to do, frankly. I put on a glove so it doesn't get all over me, and dig down and find some goopy stuff because there's some crunchy stuff on top. And then I just slather it on and then use a putty knife and just sort of trowel it on there, making it as smooth as I can. Now one thing you're gonna notice is I didn't tape off the top of the track first, and you're gonna see I'm gonna get drywall mud on the track and on the railroad ties. And there's a reason for that. I want that drywall mud right up against the railroad ties. If I tape over it and put the drywall mud on, when I pull the tape, it's gonna leave a seam there. It's not gonna be right. But I'm not really concerned about it because the drywall mud comes right off the track and the ties later, as you're gonna see. Well, the drywall mud has had a chance to set up overnight, and now it's time to sand it smooth and then move on to painting it or whatever else. Well, I discovered a problem. I skipped a step. Where the seams are in the cardboard, when you're using drywall mud, if you don't tape over those seams, they just show up as cracks. And not good cracks, not cool cracks. They're like straight cracks that are not anywhere close to realistic. So I figured I would put a skim coat of drywall mud and fill in those cracks and then sand that smooth, and boom, problem solved. Problem is, the cracks showed up again. So I'm gonna move on to cleaning up the track, and then I came up with a solution to fix those cracks that in and of itself wasn't so great either, but it got me one step closer to victory. Let's take a look at cleaning up the track. Now here's another reason why I love using the drywall mud. You can see I got it on the track and on the ties, but all I had to do was take my X-Acto knife and just start picking it off. It came off relatively quickly. It took me maybe 30 minutes to clean up the whole scene. It would have taken nearly as long to tape it all off, but my end result, in my humble opinion, looks better. And again, it's my railroad, and that's how I like to do it. And there you go. The track is cleaned off, and you would never know that there was drywall mud on there to begin with. Now it's time to move on to my solve for the cracks I have in the drywall mud. I'm doing this because it was sort of a solve. We're gonna see as we move forward. But I was doing some research on water effects, cheap water effects, and I discovered a video by Kathy Millett where she used white glue for a water effect. And through that video, I discovered white glue will self-level. It sort of makes itself flat. And I'm like, well, I want my asphalt flat. That's a great idea. I didn't want to use white glue, however, because it's water soluble, and with the scenery and stuff around it, I didn't want it to reactivate and screw the whole thing up. So I used wood glue, and it worked out pretty good. I just squirted wood glue all over the areas that I wanted to cover, and then took a brush and just brushed it all around, and then I just let that dry, and boom, nice flat surface. Okay, so while that's drying, if you'll permit me, I want to show you something completely unrelated to Switch Junction, and that is my barges I made over here at the port. I'm very happy with these barges, and I actually made a video for the members of our channel on how I did that. Now, I do that from time to time. I'll make a video that shows some behind the scenes kind of stuff, and if you're into that sort of thing, I'm going to ask you to just click the join button over on the channel page and see if that's something you might be interested in. I do a lot of posts, a lot of behind the scenes kind of videos. We just sort of hang out here, mostly on Friday nights when I'm really tired after work and just want to hang out with my friends. So anyway, give that a shot. But now let's get back to Switch Junction. Once all that wood glue had dried on there and it was just about ready to paint, one more thing that I needed to do, and that is put in the grade crossing where vehicles enter the town. To do that, I cut out some styrene plastic, basically using the same technique I cut out the cardboard. I put a piece of paper down, traced over it with a pencil or my fingernails, and then cut out and just fine-tuned the plastic until it's set right in there. Then to make sure I wouldn't have any problems with the trains on my grade crossing, I pushed through one of my coal cars, making sure the wheel flanges cleared the grade crossing, and it seemed to be okay. So the next thing to do then is to just super glue that down. Again, out of the not rocket science playbook, I took some super glue and I dropped it along the edge of the railroad ties and then pushed the piece into place, held it for a couple seconds until it's set up, and then just repeated that process all the way across the grade crossing. Now, one of the things you may be able to detect or be able to see in this video is where the plastic meets the drywall mud or meets the wood glue. I sort of etched it out in there a little bit, so it's a little bit more flush down in the roadway. And I went through and I covered those edges with some more of that wood glue and let that set up, and at that point it's looking pretty good. All right, grade crossing installed, wood glue dry, everything looking good. Now it's time to paint, and here's where we discovered a problem with using the whole wood glue surface technique. It does not like paint at all. It hates paint. It is so slick. It's like trying to paint ice or something. It was very tough to get paint on this. And in other scenes, I've used black paint and just painted on the drywall mud, and it looks like asphalt. So that's what I thought I'd do here. I'd squirt out some black acrylic paint painted along there, and when it was done, it looked like crap. It really looked bad, people. I let it dry, and it was shiny. It looked like it was greasy and oily. It was terrible. I almost didn't show it to you on video, quite frankly. But you know, it's a regular guy technique. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But anyway, while I was letting that paint dry, I went through and I took basically just some brown paint and painted over the areas where there's going to be dirt. So there you go. That's what it looks like with the brown dirt color on there and the really shiny, oily looking asphalt paint. I don't know, it just doesn't look good right here, people, at all. I'm almost ashamed to show this to you. So I thought to fix that, I want to scuff it up a little bit. So I just took a sanding sponge and I sanded down on top of all the areas that were black to try to give it some tooth, some grit, something that doesn't look like a painted mirror. After I did that, I took some gray paint, painted over the top of all of that, and let that dry, and we got much closer to looking like we had asphalt surfaces and dirt surfaces. So it was a save, but I went through a lot of junk because I didn't tape the seams in the cardboard. Had I done that, the drywall mud would have been fine. It would have taken to the paint just fine. It would have looked great. Instead, it was a lot more work. Let's move on to some of the next steps. So one of those next steps is to put down some actual dirt where there's gonna be dirt on the layout. A lot of you guys have seen me do this before, but just to be thorough, let me show you how I do it. First step is to take and cover the entire area with full strength white glue. Then I took some dirt I got off a job site at one point, and I put it in a cup, I put a stocking over it, and then I sifted it through and just cover the entire thing with real dirt. Now, once the dirt's on there and the glue's kind of had a chance to dry, the next thing to do is to get it off the track and off the asphalt areas. I just do that by taking my shop vac and vacuuming it up. Now, I don't put a stocking or something over the end of the shop vac when I'm vacuuming up the dirt because I've got a lifetime supply of dirt. I'm in construction and there's dirt everywhere all the time, so I can just vacuum it up knowing that I can get more easily. Anyway, go through and vacuum the dirt off the paved areas, the track, any place I don't want the dirt, and then make sure I didn't get some errant glue or some dirt somewhere where I don't want it. Then it's time to move on to painting, weathering, and ballasting the track. To do that, we start off by cutting out some railroad ties and slipping them under the rail joiners where we cut off to join the track. Then I go through and I use this railroad tie brown paint to paint the web of the rails, to paint the ties, to paint everything. Now, a lot of folks will use an airbrush to do this, right? It's quicker and actually get a better coating of it, but I've got so much scenery in place around it. I just like to take a brush and just brush it on, so that's what I did. I just took a paintbrush and brushed along the web of the rails and got the ties. Now, I'm not too concerned about getting all the way around the railroad ties. I just need to get enough of the railroad tie that the ballast will shield it from the rest of it and give it that sort of railroad tie brown color that we're looking for. So you can see I went through and I painted all of the track with that railroad tie brown paint, and you know, in and of itself, you can leave it like that and it will look great, but there's a couple extra steps I want to take to get a little bit more authenticity, a little bit more realism, and one of those things is to randomly weather some of the ties a slightly different color. And so to do that, I took this gray paint and some water, and then I went through and I just randomly sort of weathered ties here and there, not all of them, just some of them. I kind of like the way that was turning out. So the next thing was I took some brown paint, diluted it, and went through and randomly painted some more of the railroad ties. But the net effect of that was I had some railroad tie brown railroad ties. And then I had a weathered tie. And then I had some railroad tie brown railroad ties. I didn't really like the stark change in it. So I took one extra step. I took some burnt sienna brown paint. It's a very dark paint. It's got a little bit of red in it. And I just dry brushed that along the tops of the railroad ties. And I gotta tell you, that extra step really made this track look awesome. But we're not quite done. The final step, the creme de la creme, if you will, is to take some rust-colored paint, almost a stain. It's a Vallejo paint I'm using. And I go through and I paint the web of the rail and try to catch the tie plates and the spikes, just the top of it, just weather it enough to give it a rusty kind of look. I went a little crazy on this old section of track back up here in Old Town Switch Junction, and I didn't go as crazy back in the rest of it, where presumably the track is newer and not so rusty. With the rust installed at the web of the rail and on top of the spikes and tie plates, the next thing to do at this point is I gotta go through and clean the track. I just took a rag with some 70% isopropyl alcohol, wiped along the top of the track because it's got some buildup of paint, who knows what else on there, and I just want to make sure it's clean before it builds up too much. So with the track painted and weathered and looking pretty good, time to move on to ballasting it. Now there's a number of techniques you can use to ballast track, and they all look good, I guess, but I'm going to show you the way I do it, and we're going to use this. Boom, Woodland Scenics Gray Blend Fine Ballast. I like it because it's got an aggregate kind of color that matches the prototype in the area that I live in. It's got a little light, it's got a little dark, looks pretty good. What I do is I put it in a cup and I sprinkle it between the rails. Then I just use my fingers and sort of run it along there to sort of smooth it out, kind of grate it out between the rails. Then using a fine bristled brush, I go through and I compact the ballast down between the railroad ties. Now, that may be a term that I just made up in this video, compacting your ballast. And the reason I do that is I have found on other areas of the layout that if I just put it on there and glue it down, the gaps between the little pieces of ballast are unrealistically big. By compacting it, it gets much flatter and looks much more like the prototype, at least in my humble opinion. And again, it's my railroad, and so that's the way we're gonna do it. Once I get it about right between the rails, then I go through and I sprinkle it on the shoulders. Use a brush to brush that down, and again, compact everything in place. And the final step is to actually use my fingers to press it down to get it at the right shape. Now, a lot of people won't use their fingers to press it down. They'll use a brush or something else, and that's fine. You can do that. But I've got this tactile thing. That's why I don't wear gloves a lot of times, because I need to feel what I'm doing. So I press it down and press the shoulders down. And come the end of the day, when I look at it, you know, it comes out looking really good. Well, anyway, employing all those regular guy techniques, this is what we end up with. The ballast is looking pretty good in my humble opinion. The railroad ties stick up a little bit above the ballast, which is very close to what the prototype looks like. And so now it's time to move on to the next step, which is to glue it down. Now, again, taking a page from the It Ain't Rocket Science, baby, playbook, first thing I do is I take a pipette with some 70% isopropyl alcohol and just wash everything down with that. Now, the reason we're using the alcohol is to break the surface tension of the material beneath it, in this case, the ballast. Otherwise, the glue is just gonna sit on top and either never penetrate or take forever to do so. So by putting the alcohol on first, it allows the glue to get down into all the ballast and stick it down really well. Once I've got it saturated in the 70% isopropyl alcohol, and I let it set up for a while, make sure it gets down into that ballast. Then I take loosely a 35 to 65% solution of white glue and water. And using a pipette, drop it on there. Now, I don't want to push on the pipette and have it wash all the ballast out. I've done that before, and ballast ends up floating. Ballast goes wherever ballast is going to go. It looks terrible. So instead, I've learned to just drop it on there and let it wick in between the ties and around the ties and secure the ballast. And at the end of the day, it looks really good. Next thing is, I'll use a little tip I learned from my friend Cody Gribno over at Model Railroader Video Plus, and that is to take this steel brush and gently brush along the tops of the track. What this is gonna do is it's gonna break off pieces of ballast that ended up getting stuck on top of the railroad ties. Then I take a thumbnail or fingernail and I go through and I scrape along the web of the rail to get any errant pieces of ballast off the web of the rail to make sure the trains run smoothly over our newly laid ballasted track. Well, that ballast came out looking pretty good in my humble opinion, and now it's time to move on to some landscaping. So what I'm gonna do is pick a small piece of it, show you the technique, and then I'm gonna go through off camera and do the rest of it. So let's get in here to the back and what is an original piece of switch junction. The first thing I'm gonna do is lay down some full strength white glue. Then using some Woodland Scenics Earth Blend ground foam, I go through and I just cover the entire area. It got a little clumpy here and there, so I fixed that by just grating it out with my fingers and then tamping it down a bit to make a nice smooth surface. After that, we take the 70% isopropyl alcohol, douse everything with that so that we can glue that down. I use the same 35% glue, 65% water mixture to glue all that down. Now, while the glue was still wet, I used my static grass applicator and I put a pretty healthy dose of static grass on top of all that glue. Then I took my shop vac and I vacuumed up the excess. Now, here's another tip for you. If you run your shop vac on top of that static grass without touching it, right? That's very tough to do because there's a lot of suction there. Without touching it, it'll pull up stuff that didn't get stuck, but it'll also align the fibers to be more straight up and down. It's a little tip I learned from watching YouTube videos. Anyway, so then I took some light green, dark green, and tan ground foam and randomly placed it in there to put in a whole bunch of shrubbery. After that, I put a drill bit by pin vise and drilled some holes to plant a couple trees. Now, here's the thing I didn't tell you. That area back there is covered in about 3/8 of an inch worth of styrofoam. This is from way back in the day when I wanted to raise the elevation of switch junction when it was on the old layout. Well, back there makes it real easy for the pin vise to pop through, for the drill bit to pop through. And then out here in the front, I got the styrofoam and the cardboard, still very easy for the drill bit to pop through. If you've got plywood as a substrate, the pin vicing is going to take you a while. I think I've got other areas where I had to deal with that, so you might want to put it on an actual drill. So with the trees installed, the next thing I want to do is put in some details to kind of pay homage to the old switch junction. And one of the things is I've got this wooden wagon here that's been abandoned. I just sort of stuffed that in and glued it in on the hillside. And then again, part of the old switch junction module is I had a bunch of cows back there, and so I just decided I was going to glue more cows, the same cows as it turns out, just glue those in. Boy, I got to tell you, I'm totally stoked with the way those details turned out for a couple of reasons. One, they just look cool, by the way, having the cows back there and something for the viewer to discover. It's totally amazing. Second of all, it's very close to what I had in the original version of Switch Junction. As you guys probably already know, I brought this whole module over from my old layout and I reintegrated it into this layout because it's one of my favorite scenes I've ever built. And I'll tell you what, as we're gonna see when it's done, it's still one of my favorite scenes on the railroad. It looks really awesome. But let's move over to historic Switch Junction. If you've been following along, you know that I've got some structures from back when this was kind of an 1800s layout, and then I've since, modernized. And I moved those structures over to here in this area, and I'm calling it Historic Switch Junction. It's like a tourist attraction now. I did some things with the roads and with the structures that I'm going to show you right now. First thing I want to do is mark out the areas where there are dirt roads and then where there's just scenery being applied. So what I did is I put all the structures back in place. Then I took a pencil and I traced around where the structures are and kind of where I wanted the road to be. Then another little tip that I invented, I think, pretty much, I'm gonna take credit for it in any case, and that is I took my Bright Boy that I normally use to clean my track with, and I run it along the dirt that I installed previously. And what this does is it tends to take the dark, kind of muddy looking dirt from the scenery materials being applied to it, and it brightens it up, makes it look more well-traveled. Meanwhile, the other areas where it's not a road are gonna remain dark and kind of muddy looking. Then I put some landscaping in the landscape areas and put the structures back in. And I gotta tell you something, very happy with the way this turned out. Let me show you a few panning shots of the entire scene and then we'll wrap this thing up. Folks, I gotta tell you, really excited about the way this scene is turning out. And again, all of it using regular guy techniques. I shove off and I glue stuff down, and if it doesn't work, we redo it, as you saw with the asphalt that I had to redo. But come the end of the day, it looks really good. Now, the next thing I'm gonna do in our next video is we're gonna put some street lighting in, because I bought that already. It's gonna look really awesome. And I think we're gonna concentrate on this merchant row back here. We're gonna add some LED lighting to that, clean it up, and then start working on some of the other structures. We gotta put some striping in the roads, we gotta put some people in, because other than that, it's a ghost town. But come the end of the day, at this point, looking really good. Anyway, thank you for being with me here today on It's My Railroad. I had a great time working on this. Took a lot of time to do it, but I hope you had a great time watching this video. Again, don't forget to check out that join button if you want to see some behind the scenes kind of stuff. And until the next time I see you, thank you so much for being here. My name is Steve Brown, and rail on, my friends.